Jalil Jameson didn't die because he did something wrong. He died because he was born with the wrong skin color. The Atlanta sky was gray not because of the weather, but because of the heavy, suffocating tension that loomed over the south side. Jalil! Mama Ruth rushed outside, only to collapse at the sight of her son's lifeless body. Her wails pierced the night, but no one came to help. News of the shooting spread fast, but no one was surprised. This wasn't the first time a young black man had been killed for being suspicious. And then the news reached someone they never should have messed with. 4 days later, a black military SUV rolled into the neighborhood, its tires grinding against the pavement like they were crushing something beneath them. The door swung open. A man stepped out, tall, dark-skinned, his eyes cold as steel. Zay is back. Zay wasn't just some guy. He was a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Special Forces, 15 years in the military, years fighting in places where life was cheaper than a bullet. He knew war, but he never thought the real war would be in his own homeland. Zay stood in front of the old house, the place where Mama Ruth had raised him and Jalil. But today, instead of the familiar laughter, there was only silence and the faint scent of burning incense drifting through the air. Inside, Mama Ruth sat quietly at Jalil's memorial. Her eyes were swollen red. Her frail hands trembled as she stroked her son's photo. Zay stepped forward. Mama Ruth looked up at him. No tears, no words of blame, just one sentence. They thought I would stay silent. They thought you wouldn't come back. Zay clenched his fists. Fire burned in his eyes. He had watched brothers fall on the battlefield, but seeing his own flesh and blood murdered on his own land, no, unacceptable. He didn't need to ask who did it. The whole neighborhood knew, but the system had already covered it up. Walsh and Sawyer were still walking free. The media was calling Jalil a potential threat. The police only said they were investigating. Everyone knew what that meant. Nothing was going to happen. Zay used to believe that justice could be achieved the right way. But now he wasn't so sure anymore. Mama Ruth didn't need words of comfort. She needed a promise, and Zay gave her one. Not with words, but with the look in his eyes as he stepped out of the house. Justice would come, but not the way Walsh and Sawyer expected. The gunshots still echoed in Zay's head. Bang, bang, bang. 3 merciless shots tore through the night. 3 bullets pierced through Jalil Jameson's skin. 3 seconds. His brother's life was stolen, and the whole city knew no one would pay for it. Zay had never felt so powerless. He had stood on battlefields, watched comrades fall, seen blood stain the scorching sand, but at least there he knew who the enemy was. This time, the enemy was wearing a badge. 4 days ago, He received the news while deployed in the Middle East. His phone buzzed in the middle of the night. Mama Ruth was calling. She never called at this hour. When he picked up, her voice was no longer the strong, steady voice he had always known. It was broken. Jalil is gone, baby. They killed him, Zay. The world collapsed. Zay left his unit the next morning. No permission, no orders. He didn't need orders. Jalil couldn't wait for justice. He had to go home now. He stood at the door of his family home. Mama Ruth sat in silence in the living room, her frail hands clutching the scarf Jalil used to wear. Her eyes were empty. Zay stepped inside. Mama Ruth looked up, staring at him. No tears, no screams, no questions. Just one sentence. You won't let this go, will you? Zay met her gaze. No, Mama, I won't let this go. That night, Zay didn't sleep. He sat in front of the screen watching the security footage over and over again. The security camera had captured everything. Jalil didn't do anything wrong. He was just standing there, just holding his phone. And then, bang, 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 Jalil collapsed. No warning, no hands up, just bullets. Zay clenched his fists so tightly his palms bled. What the hell kind of justice is this? The next day, the police issued a statement. The shooting was justified. The suspect made a suspicious movement. The officers followed standard procedure. Lies. All of it lies. Zay needed a plan. He wasn't an idiot. He knew if he stormed the police station with nothing but rage and fists, they'd take him down immediately. But Zay wasn't just anybody. He had trained hundreds of Special Forces soldiers. He knew how to dismantle enemies from the shadows. He knew how to win without firing a single bullet. And this time, this war was his. The next morning, Zay walked into the Atlanta Police Department. He moved through the doors, his uniform crisp, his lieutenant colonel insignia gleaming on his chest. The entire room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. He walked straight to the front desk. I want to see Captain Briggs. The desk officer, a young white woman, glanced at him, her voice stiff. Do you have an appointment? Zay smiled, but his eyes were cold. Tell him Zay Jameson is here. He'll want to see me. Inside Briggs' office. Jameson, I know this is painful, but we're investigating. I promise you everything will be handled properly. Cut the bullshit. Zay's voice was ice cold. Briggs froze. Zay leaned forward, planting his hands firmly on the desk, his stare piercing through the man in front of him. I know you altered the reports. I know you covered for Walsh and Sawyer. I know you think this will all be forgotten in 3 days. Briggs chuckled. Oh, yeah? And what exactly are you going to do? Join a protest? Zay looked at him like he was already dead. I don't protest. I end things. Briggs tightened his jaw. You're threatening a police officer, Jameson. Zay smirked. And you murdered my brother. Briggs laughed dryly, shaking his head. Let me tell you a hard truth, Jameson. In this country, another dead black kid is just another day of the week. You can shout, you can cry, you can demand justice all you want. Ki-yum-tit. He leaned in closer, voice dropping to a whisper. Hey, but in the end, we still win. Zay sat back in his chair, arms crossed. Oh, yeah? You sure about that? Briggs narrowed his eyes. The hell are you talking about? Check your phone, Briggs. Briggs frowned, pulling his phone out of his pocket. He unlocked the screen, and his face drained of color. On the screen, breaking news, leaked video. Atlanta cops laugh about killing Jalil Jameson. His hand started shaking. Zay leaned back in his chair, grinning slightly. And this is just the beginning. The room fell dead silent. Briggs stared at his phone screen, his breathing heavy. The headline burned into his retinas. Leaked video. Atlanta cops laugh about killing Jalil Jameson. The whole world was watching now. Briggs gritted his teeth. What the fuck did you do, Jameson? Zay smirked, arms crossed. I did what you were too stupid to prevent. I let the world see who you really are. Outside, the city was erupting. The leaked video had spread like wildfire. Thousands of people were now gathered outside the police station. Their voices shook the streets. Justice for Jalil. Fire Walsh and Sawyer. The system is rotten. Social media exploded. Justice for Jalil was trending one worldwide. And Zay knew this was just the beginning. Back inside Briggs' office, the air was thick with tension. Walsh and Sawyer stood frozen, their faces pale. We're fucked, Sawyer muttered under his breath. Walsh swallowed hard. No, we still have options. He turned to Briggs, voice shaking. Briggs, you have connections, right? Call someone. Get this thing shut down. Briggs took a deep breath, his mind racing. Then he grabbed his phone and made a call. Get rid of the video now. 9:30 a.m. Mama Ruth's house. Zay stood outside, watching as the protests filled the streets. Quincy stood next to him, phone in hand, eyes lit with fire. Bro, you just turned Atlanta into a goddamn war zone. Zay didn't respond. He knew the cops weren't going to sit back and take this. They would hit back, and so would he. Meanwhile, inside a black SUV moving through the city, Sawyer leaned forward, gripping the seat. What the fuck are we gonna do now? Walsh stared out the window, his jaw clenched. We finish this. He pulled out his phone, dialing a number. Briggs, we need Jameson gone. Today. Briggs's voice came through the line, cold and sharp. Consider it done. 1 p.m. A knock on the door. Bang, bang, bang. Mama Ruth's house shook as fists pounded against the front door. Zay stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. Open up, we have a search warrant. 5 uniformed officers stood outside, hands on their guns. Mama Ruth stepped forward, trembling. A search warrant? For what? One of the officers pushed her aside. Move, ma'am, let us do our job. Zay tightened his grip on his gun. So, this is how you want to play it? You think you can intimidate me? The lead officer stepped forward, sneering. You're coming with us, Jameson. 110 Pim. Detained at the police station. Zay sat inside an interrogation room, his hands cuffed. Outside, the voices of the protesters rumbled like a storm. He knew they couldn't hold him long. They couldn't keep a city in chaos forever. And they didn't realize they just picked a fight with the wrong man. 300 p.m. Outside the police station. Free Zay! Atlanta police are murderers. The crowd was growing. Quincy stood in front, megaphone in hand. They think they can silence us? Hell no. Zay sat inside his holding cell, listening. His eyes never wavered. 500 p.m. Briggs makes a final move. Briggs stalked into his office, slamming the door. He turned to Walsh and Sawyer, his face twisted with rage. We're losing control. Sawyer was already sweating. What do we do? Briggs glared at them. I don't care what you have to do, but before the sun sets, I want Zay Jameson erased from this city. The air was thick with tension. Inside his holding cell, Zay sat still. Outside, the protest grew louder, and he knew one thing for certain. Briggs wasn't going to let him walk out of here alive. 5:30 p.m. Inside the police station. Briggs paced his office, veins bulging on his forehead. Walsh and Sawyer stood nearby, their faces pale with fear. We're losing control! Briggs slammed his fist on the desk. This isn't just a protest anymore. This is a fucking revolution. Sawyer wiped the sweat off his forehead. We need to get rid of him, Briggs. Tonight. Briggs gritted his teeth. Already working on it. He picked up his phone, dialing a number. I don't care what it takes. Jameson doesn't make it out of that cell. Understood? A voice on the other end responded. Consider it handled. 600 p.m. Inside the holding cell. Zay sat calmly, watching the flickering light bulb above him. He knew he had been in situations like this before. When the enemy was desperate, they always made a final, reckless move. And that's when they fell. 6:30 p.m. The plan unfolds. The door to the holding area creaked open. 2 officers walked in, faces unreadable. One of them unlocked the cell. You're being transferred, Jameson. Zay raised an eyebrow. Transferred where? You ask too many questions. One officer grabbed his arm hard. Zay let them. For now. 6:45 p.m. Outside the police station, the crowd had swelled to over 5,000 people. News cameras flashed. Reporters spoke into their microphones. This protest is unlike anything we've seen before. Public outrage has reached a breaking point. Kiskiktabai. Pka. Then suddenly a voice boomed over a megaphone. "They're moving Zay. They're taking him through the back." 6:50 p. The back entrance. The officers led Zay through a dimly lit corridor. He could feel it now. Something was off. They weren't taking him to another holding area. They were taking him somewhere to disappear. Zay glanced at the officers. They were too tense, too prepared. And then he saw it. The black unmarked SUV parked out back. 6:52 p.m. The ambush. As they stepped outside, one of the officers gripped his radio. "We have the package." Zay exhaled slowly. This was it. The back doors of the SUV swung open. A masked man stepped out holding a silencer-fitted pistol. He raised the gun, and in that split second, Zay moved. 6:53 p.m. The counterattack begins. Bam! Zay head-butted the first officer, sending him staggering backward. Crack! He disarmed the second officer with a single precise motion before the masked gunman could react. Bang! Zay spun the officer's gun around and fired. A single shot, straight to the head. The gunman dropped instantly. 6:55 p.m. The chaos explodes. The gunshot alerted the protesters. Quincy saw the struggle from across the street. Zay's in trouble. The crowd surged forward like a tidal wave. Police lines broke apart. Atlanta was erupting. 7:00 p.m. Briggs' final mistake. Briggs watched from the third floor of the station, eyes wide with panic. His officers were getting overrun. His plan was falling apart. And then his phone vibrated. He picked it up, and his face turned ghost white. Breaking news: FBI launches official investigation into Atlanta Police Department. Briggs staggered back. 7:05 p.m. Zay walks free. Zay stood at the edge of the police station steps. Quincy and the protesters surrounded him. The entire city watched. And then, one by one, officers began laying down their weapons, because now they knew Briggs was finished. 7:05 p.m. The end of an era. As the sun set over Atlanta, FBI agents stormed the station. Briggs tried to run, but there was nowhere left to go. They grabbed him, slapped the cuffs on, and as they dragged him through the front doors, he locked eyes with Zay. Briggs gritted his teeth. "You think you've won?" Zay stared back, calm, shaken. "No, I know I have. The war was over. But justice wasn't finished yet. Briggs was in cuffs. Walsh and Sawyer were in federal custody. The entire Atlanta Police Department was under investigation. But for Zay, the fight wasn't just about today. It was about what came next. 1 week later, the trial begins. The courthouse was packed. Reporters, lawyers, activists, the entire country was watching. Briggs, Walsh, and Sawyer sat at the defendant's table. Their faces were hollow because they knew the system wouldn't save them this time. The prosecutor stood up. He cleared his throat, then turned to the jury. "This case isn't complicated. It's not about a split-second decision. It's about a pattern of corruption, a pattern of abuse, a system designed to let men like them get away with murder. He gestured to the screen behind him, and then the video played. The footage of Walsh and Sawyer laughing about Jalil's death. Their words echoed through the silent courtroom. "Did you see his mom crying? Damn near pissed myself." Another one bites the dust. The jury's face is twisted in disgust. A woman covered her mouth, horrified. And in that moment, the verdict was already sealed. The sentencing. The judge looked down at the three men. His voice was firm, unwavering. "Darren Walsh and Ethan Sawyer, you are sentenced to life without parole. James Briggs, you are sentenced to life plus 50 years. The courtroom erupted. Mama Ruth closed her eyes, gripping Zay's hand, and for the first time in weeks, she could breathe. Outside the courthouse, the crowd cheered. News cameras flashed. "Justice for Jalil! They finally paid. This is only the beginning." Zay stepped up to the podium. He looked at the sea of faces. Some of them were still angry. Some of them were relieved. And some of them were just waiting to see what he would say next. Zay spoke. "Justice isn't just about one case. It's about the system that let this happen in the first place. This isn't the end. It's just the start." He paused. Then he looked straight into the cameras. "To every cop who thinks they can get away with murder, watch what just happened here. Watch and learn." 1 month later, Jalil's grave. Zay stood alone. The sky was clear. The air was still. He placed a single white rose on Jalil's headstone. He whispered, "I kept my promise, little bro. Rest easy."